I never thought I'd be the guy who would find himself in a situation like this. My name is Mark, and I've been married to Julie for 7 years. We met in college, both ambitious and hopeful about the future. I was working my way up in a marketing firm, and she was thriving in her career as a real estate agent. Life was supposed to be a series of perfect moments, but it turns out it was more like a horror movie in disguise. Things started to shift in our relationship about 6 months ago. At first, it was subtle. Julie began to come home later than usual, claiming she was busy with clients. I wanted to be supportive, believing in her work ethic, but deep down, I felt something wasn't right. I noticed she started to dress differently, too, more provocative outfits, flashy jewelry that I knew we couldn't afford. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was hard to ignore the signs. Then there was the phone. Julie became protective of it, often taking it into the bathroom with her or keeping it on silent. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just her need for privacy, but my gut was screaming at me. I tried to ask her about it, but she'd just wave it off, saying I was being paranoid. "You know how it is in real estate, Mark. I can't let anyone down," she'd say. Each time I'd feel a mix of frustration and helplessness. The moment I discovered her affair was a slap in the face. It was a Thursday, and I had planned a romantic dinner for us at our favorite restaurant. I got off work early, excited to surprise her. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed her car was already home. Odd, considering she had said she'd be out late. My heart raced. Maybe this was my chance to reconnect. I walked into the house, and that's when I heard them. Laughter. Soft, sultry laughter that didn't belong to her. I froze in the entrance, my stomach dropping. I crept toward the living room, and there they were, Julie lounging on the couch, her legs draped over the armrest, and some guy with slick-back hair and an expensive suit. He was leaning in, whispering something into her ear that made her giggle like a schoolgirl. I felt like I was watching a train wreck in slow motion. My heart raced and anger coursed through me. I felt betrayed by the woman I loved and by the very institution of marriage. Adrenaline kicked in, and I stormed into the room, my voice booming in disbelief. "What the hell is going on here?" Julie jumped up, her face a mask of shock. The guy, Dan, quickly stood up, trying to shrink back into the shadows. "Mark, I can explain." She stammered, her usual confident demeanor evaporating in an instant. "Explain. Please do tell. What's the explanation for this?" I shouted, gesturing between them. The look in her eyes, panic mixed with guilt, was something I'd never forget. She started to come up with excuses, the typical lies. "We were just discussing business, I swear." But her eyes betrayed her. Even in that moment, she was trying to manipulate the situation, twisting the truth into something I could digest. The confrontation spiraled from there. I felt my world crashing down around me as I struggled to keep my composure. She accused me of not supporting her, of being controlling, shifting the blame onto me. I lost. The woman I thought I knew turned into a stranger right in front of me. The anger morphed into a profound sadness I had never experienced before. I spent the night pacing, lost in my emotions. I couldn't believe this was happening. The love I once felt was now replaced with a cocktail of rage, betrayal, and heartbreak. I thought about all those moments we shared, the laughter, the plans for our future, and now it all felt like a cruel joke. Yet as I laid wide awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized I had a choice to make. I could either let this destroy me, or I could fight back. The thought of revenge slowly crept into my mind, and with it came a sense of empowerment. If she thought she could just destroy our lives without consequences, she was sorely mistaken. I began to formulate a plan, one that would ensure both my wife and her lover would face the repercussions of their actions. It might be vindictive, but I was done being the victim. I would turn the tables. I was ready to take action. After the confrontation, I plunged into a dark place. I was angry and hurt, but beneath that anger simmered the seed of a plan. I needed to figure out how to make both Julie and Dan pay for the betrayal. My life felt like a whirlwind of confusion, and I needed clarity. It was time to gather my thoughts and resources. The next few days were surreal. Julie tried to reach out, but I shut her down. I was no longer the naive husband she could manipulate. I started to keep my distance, using work and hobbies as excuses to avoid her. I noticed how her attempts to connect with me felt desperate, almost pathetic. It was as if she was trying to reel me back in, but I was no longer interested in her empty promises. Instead, I began to investigate Dan. As a real estate mogul, he had a reputation to uphold, and I knew I could exploit that. My background in marketing gave me some insight into public relations and the way perception could be twisted. I started researching his business dealings, looking for any dirt I could dig up. Late one night, as I scoured the internet, I found a few articles detailing some questionable practices in his real estate ventures. There were murmurs of financial irregularities and a couple of lawsuits filed by disgruntled clients. It was a start. I made notes and began compiling a dossier. The more I uncovered, the more my anger fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. I also reached out to some of Julie's friends under the guise of catching up. I casually mentioned that I was concerned about her long hours at work and how I felt she was losing herself. I wanted to see if they knew anything about her and Dan. As I suspected, the whispers had started. It wasn't just an affair, people knew about them. I was gathering intel and it felt empowering. As I continued my investigation, I turned my attention to Dan's business. I discovered he had recently secured a major deal, a high-profile property investment that could make or break his reputation. It was time to act. I contacted a financial investigator who specialized in uncovering fraud. I explained the situation, sharing the information I had collected. The investigator agreed to help me for a fee, but I was ready to pay whatever it took. Meanwhile, Julie's attempts to rekindle our relationship felt like a chore I had no interest in participating in. She'd come home with flowers, trying to guilt-trip me into forgiving her. "Mark, we can work through this. I made a mistake." She'd plead, her tone dripping with insincerity. Each time I felt more resolved in my mission. I didn't need to forgive her. I needed to ensure she understood the consequences of her actions. Weeks went by and the investigator began to uncover more damning evidence against Dan. It turned out he had been involved in manipulating property prices, orchestrating sales that benefited him while leaving clients and investors in the lurch. The thrill of knowing I was close to bringing him down surged through me. I felt like a puppet master pulling the strings. Then came the day of reckoning. The investigator called me, excitement in his voice. "Mark, we've got enough evidence to make this stick. It's just a matter of taking the right steps." My heart raced as I listened. I was on the brink of exposing Dan's fraudulent dealings. It was time to execute my plan. I gathered everything: the articles, the testimonies, the investigator's report, and prepared to deliver it to the authorities. But first, I needed to confront Julie one last time. I wanted her to understand the gravity of what was about to happen and how her betrayal had led us to this point. That evening, I asked her to meet me at a park near our home. I wanted a neutral ground, somewhere that didn't feel like our house, filled with memories, now soured by her actions. When she arrived, her face lit up with hope, but I knew better. I felt like a storm brewing inside me, ready to unleash. "Julie, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady and firm. She looked confused but nodded, sitting down on a bench. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation." I paused, gauging her reaction. "About you and Dan." Her expression shifted, panic flashing in her eyes. "Mark, I told you it was a mistake. I love you. You're the one I want." "Is that why you've been sneaking around with him? Because you love me?" I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not asking for your love anymore, Julie. I'm about to ruin everything you and Dan built together." Her face paled. "What do you mean?" She stammered, her voice rising. I pulled out my notes, the evidence I had gathered. "I'm going to make sure he's investigated for fraud. You both will lose everything." Her mouth dropped open and I could see the realization washing over her. The shock morphed into anger and she shot back. "You wouldn't dare. This is insane." "I already have," I replied calmly. "You may have betrayed me, but I'm not going to let this go without consequences. You took everything from me, and now I'm going to take everything from you." The confrontation shifted from her trying to convince me to forgive her to her threats of retaliation. I stood my ground, knowing that I was finally in control. As I walked away from that meeting, I felt a mixture of vindication and sorrow. I had lost the love of my life, but I was no longer the victim. I was ready to see this through, knowing that the fallout was just beginning. The days after my confrontation with Julie were a blur of adrenaline and anticipation. I had unleashed a storm, and now I was waiting to see how it would all unfold. I had the evidence. I had the investigator on my side. I was ready to take down the man who had so brazenly stepped into my life, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. A good offense was my best defense, and I was prepared to play hardball. I decided to take action quickly. My investigator, Tom, was eager to get started. We arranged a meeting to go over the evidence I had collected, and I spent every night poring through documents, trying to understand the intricacies of Dan's business operations. I wanted to ensure that when the time came, I had everything buttoned up, no loose ends. Tom and I met at a small cafe, and he laid out the groundwork. "Mark, we need to approach this carefully. If we go public with this information, we want it to be undeniable. We need to gather testimonies from clients, dig deeper into his financial records, and even get a few insiders who can corroborate our findings." The thrill of being proactive in this situation was intoxicating. I had spent so long feeling powerless, and now I had the upper hand. Tom and I drafted a plan outlining our next steps. We would gather testimonies from disgruntled clients and former employees, focusing on the patterns of deceit Dan had cultivated in his career. I found myself drowning in the details: receipts, emails, contracts, anything that could link Dan to fraudulent activities. Meanwhile, I remained emotionally detached from Julie. The more she tried to reach out, the more I pushed her away. She filled our home with flowers and desperate pleas for forgiveness, but I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. I was on a mission. The woman who had once been my partner now felt like a ghost, someone I couldn't connect with anymore. One evening, as I sifted through paperwork in my home office, I received a text from Tom. "I've got a lead on a former associate of Dan's who is willing to talk. Let's meet tomorrow." My heart raced. This could be the breakthrough I needed. I could feel the tension building, a sense of impending justice that fueled my determination. The next day, Tom and I met with the former associate, Olivia, in a dimly lit diner. She was nervous, glancing around as if she feared being watched. "I'm only doing this because I can't stand what Dan has done to people," she said, her voice a whisper. "He's a snake." Olivia filled us in on the details of Dan's operation, describing how he used loopholes and deception to manipulate property prices and clients. "He's got a history of cutting corners. I've seen it happen firsthand. He'll throw anyone under the bus if it serves him," she said, her anger palpable. I took careful notes, determined to use her testimony as part of my case. The more I learned, the more I understood the depth of Dan's betrayal, not just against me, but against everyone who trusted him. I felt a surge of energy, each piece of evidence pushing me closer to my goal. Over the next few weeks, we continued to gather information, and I felt empowered as I pieced together the puzzle of Dan's fraud. I had become a man on a mission, and I channeled my pain into this project. Meanwhile, Julie's calls and texts became increasingly frantic, filled with desperation. "Mark, please, we need to talk," she'd write. I ignored her, focusing instead on the task at hand. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the day I could submit everything to the authorities. With Tom's help, I compiled a comprehensive report containing all our findings, complete with testimonies, documents, and the investigator's notes. It was a massive undertaking, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was about to take down the man who had invaded my life and wrecked my marriage. As I walked into the office of the local regulatory agency, my heart pounded. I was nervous but also exhilarated. I approached the receptionist and handed over the dossier. "I need to file a report against Dan Thompson for real estate fraud," I said, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. The receptionist glanced at the thick stack of papers, then back at me. "You're sure about this?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. A part of me hesitated, wondering if I was making a huge mistake, but I pushed the doubt aside. This was about accountability, not just for me but for all the people Dan had wronged. "Yes," I replied firmly. I'm ready to see this through. The receptionist took the report and indicated that it would be reviewed. I left the office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The adrenaline coursed through me, but I also felt a pang of sadness. I was taking a huge step towards closure, but it also meant that the final nail in my marriage's coffin was being hammered in. That night, as I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, Julie walked in. She had a different look in her eyes, a mix of frustration and sadness. "Mark, can we talk now? We need to discuss what's happening." I sighed, knowing this was a conversation I had been trying to avoid. "What is there to talk about, Julie? You've made your choices." "I know," she said, her voice trembling, "but I want to fix this. I want us back. Just give me a chance to explain everything." I looked at her, the woman I had loved, now a stranger wrapped in guilt and regret. "Explain what exactly? How you betrayed me? How you threw away our life for a fling with a man who's about to face serious consequences?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I was stupid. Mark, I thought it was just fun, a distraction, but I realize now that it's you I love. I'm so sorry." The anger bubbled back up inside me. "I don't want to hear your apologies, Julie. It's too late for that. You made your bed and now you have to lie in it." She recoiled, the realization hitting her that I was no longer the man she could manipulate. "What are you planning to do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You'll find out soon enough," I stated, feeling the chill of satisfaction at the edge of my words. As I turned away from her, I felt a strange sense of finality. I had started this journey with heartbreak, but now I was fueled by justice. I was no longer just a husband. I was a man reclaiming his power. The fallout from my actions unfolded quickly, and I felt like I was riding a wave that I could neither control nor escape. After filing the report against Dan, I knew the wheels of justice were in motion, and I was both anxious and exhilarated. I had taken a huge step, but I also knew that there would be repercussions for both Dan and Julie. I had delivered the first blow, but the battle was far from over. A few days later, I received a call from Tom, my investigator. His voice was filled with urgency. "Mark, I just got off the phone with the agency. They're launching a formal investigation into Dan's practices. They want to interview you as a part of that process." My heart raced. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for, the chance to watch Dan's empire crumble. "Are you sure they're taking it seriously?" I asked, trying to suppress my excitement. "Absolutely. With the amount of evidence you provided, they're treating this as a high-priority case. They think there's a lot more here than meets the eye." I hung up, a mixture of relief and anticipation washing over me. I had played my cards right, and now the authorities were picking up the pieces. I couldn't help but envision Dan's downfall. The thought pulled me into a place filled with satisfaction that I hadn't experienced in weeks. However, as I prepared for my interview, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. I knew that once this information came to light, it would not only affect Dan but also Julie. It was a chain reaction, and she was at the center of it all. I kept reminding myself that this was her doing. She had put us in this situation. As I sat across from the investigator a few days later, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. The room was dimly lit, and the weight of the moment felt palpable. "Thanks for coming in," she said, her voice professional yet understanding. "I've reviewed your report and the evidence you provided. We need to hear your account of the situation." I cleared my throat and relayed everything: how I discovered the affair, how I gathered evidence of Dan's fraudulent activities, and the impact it all had on my life. The investigator listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. It felt cathartic to speak my truth, to lay everything bare. "Julie Thompson, your wife, has been implicated in some of these dealings. Do you believe she was aware of what Dan was doing?" The investigator asked, her eyes fixed on mine. I hesitated for a moment. "I don't know, but I have my suspicions. She was involved with him, and I can't imagine they weren't discussing business. She's ambitious and hungry for success, but I can't say for sure if she knew the extent of his actions." "Thank you for your honesty, Mark," the investigator said. "This investigation is just beginning, and we'll keep you informed as we learn more." As I left the agency, I felt a mix of triumph and dread. My actions were starting to take shape, but the reality of what I was doing weighed heavily on my conscience. I had set the wheels in motion for Dan's downfall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was dragging Julie down with him. Over the next few days, the tension in our home escalated. Julie's frantic attempts to get me to talk had turned desperate. I could see the worry etched on her face, and no amount of hair color changes or new clothes could mask the guilt that lingered there. "Mark, we need to talk about what's going to happen next," she exclaimed one night, her voice trembling with urgency. "I know what's going to happen, Julie. You're going to watch your lover's world crumble," I replied, my voice cold. "That's not fair. I made a mistake, yes, but I can change. We can work on this," she pleaded, her eyes wide with desperation. "Change? You think you can just take back all the damage you've done, the trust you shattered?" I shot back, feeling anger replace the lingering sadness. As the days passed, news of the investigation began to circulate among our friends and acquaintances. I started receiving texts from people who had heard whispers about Dan's alleged fraud. Some offered support while others seemed eager to gossip. I found solace in their kindness, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight, but I felt conflicted. I didn't want to hurt Julie, not really. Despite everything, she was still the woman I had once loved. I often found myself reminiscing about the good times we had shared, our first date, the way she smiled when she thought I wasn't looking, the dreams we had spun together. But those memories were now tainted, overshadowed by betrayal. Then came the moment I had dreaded. The official news broke. A local news outlet published a story detailing the investigation into Dan's real estate practices. The headline read, "Local mogul under investigation for fraudulent activities." My heart raced as I read the article, detailing the accusations and the potential consequences. I could almost feel Dan's world crashing down. He was the kind of man who thrived on power and manipulation, and now he was being exposed. I almost felt sorry for him, but that sympathy was fleeting, overshadowed by the satisfaction of knowing I had played a role in his unraveling. Julie's reaction was immediate. She was furious, her anger directed at me. "You did this. You ruined everything," she shouted, her voice echoing in the small space between us. "Did you think I'd just sit back and let him take what was mine? You're the one who made the choice to be with him," I countered, feeling both anger and guilt entwined in a tight knot in my chest. "This is going to ruin me, Mark. I had no idea what he was doing," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "It doesn't matter. You were complicit in this. You chose to betray me," I said, my voice rising with emotion. Suddenly, everything felt too real. The anger was there, but the sorrow was creeping back in. I could see how scared she was, and for a moment I felt a flicker of empathy. But that flicker was quickly extinguished by the weight of my resolve. I had come too far to turn back now. After our confrontation, I spent the night sitting on the couch, my thoughts racing. I knew I had to brace myself for the fallout. Dan would fight back, and so would Julie. This was only the beginning of a long battle. But I had made my choice, and I was ready to see it through to the end. The aftermath of the news article broke over the next few days like a series of waves crashing against the shore, each one more tumultuous than the last. Dan's world was crumbling, and in turn, so was Julie's. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, and it was hard to breathe in our home. It became a battleground of unspoken emotions, where anger clashed with regret and betrayal mingled with sorrow. Julie became increasingly frantic as the investigation progressed. One afternoon, she burst into the living room, her face flushed and her eyes wild with fear. "Mark, you need to stop this. I can't lose everything. I can't lose my career because of him." Her desperation felt almost palpable, and for a moment I could see the woman I had once loved shining through the chaos. "You're scared, I get it, but you did this to yourself," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't know. I thought he was just a businessman. I didn't think he was a fraud," she pleaded, and I could hear the panic in her tone. "Maybe, but you chose to be with him anyway. You made your bed, Julie," I said, trying to remain firm. The anger was still there, but the flicker of empathy from the night before cast shadows on my resolve. I was torn between the guilt of seeing her so distraught and the satisfaction of knowing that Dan would face consequences. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. The investigation gained momentum, and Dan's associates started to abandon ship, one by one. Those who had once supported him were now turning against him, fearing their own reputations would be tarnished if they stayed loyal. It was almost poetic. I watched as the facade of the powerful mogul began to crack, exposing the reality of a man who thrived on deceit. Julie's reaction to the situation was increasingly erratic. She oscillated between pleading with me to help her and lashing out in anger. "You're ruining my life, Mark. I can't believe you'd do this to me," she shouted one night, her face twisted in fury. "Your life? What about my life? You shattered it. You're the one who jumped into bed with another man." I shot back, feeling the familiar anger rise within me. I thought about how much I had sacrificed for her, my trust, my dignity, my happiness. "You think I'm the villain here. You're the one who chose betrayal. You brought this on yourself." Her face crumbled, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of remorse. "I'm sorry, Mark, I really am. I made a bad choice, but I didn't think it would end like this. Just please, can't you find a way to help me?" But as she spoke, the resolve I had built began to harden again. I realized that I couldn't help her. She had made her choice and I had made mine. "I can't fix this, Julie. You need to face the consequences of your actions. You've put us both in this position." In the days that followed, I continued to keep my distance from Julie. I focused my energy on the investigation and what would come next. I couldn't afford to let my emotions sway me. Dan was going to face the music, and I was going to ensure that he wouldn't get away with it. Then came the day I had been waiting for, the hearing regarding Dan's fraudulent practices. I was invited to testify, and I felt a rush of adrenaline as I prepared to walk into that courtroom. This was my moment. I could finally deliver justice, not just for myself, but for all the people Dan had wronged. As I arrived at the courthouse, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. I was nervous about what I was about to do, but I steeled myself for the fight ahead. I walked through the metal detectors and saw the somber faces waiting in the hallway, people who had been affected by Dan's actions. I felt solidarity with them. We were all in this together. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and stepped onto the stand. The room was filled with the weight of anticipation, and I glanced at Dan, who sat across the room, his demeanor surprisingly calm. He had a lawyer by his side, someone who looked like they could take on the world, and in that moment I realized this was going to be a battle. The prosecutor began by asking me about my relationship with Dan and how I discovered the affair. I spoke clearly, detailing the timeline of events and how I had gathered evidence of his fraudulent activities. I could feel the tension in the room as I laid out the facts. The prosecutor then presented my evidence, including the testimonies from clients and Olivia's damning statements. Dan's lawyer stood up, trying to discredit my testimony. "You're simply a scorned husband seeking revenge for a personal vendetta, aren't you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. I felt my anger flare, but I kept my composure. "No, I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking justice for those he has wronged," I replied, my voice steady. The room fell silent, and I could see the impact of my words. I was no longer just a victim. I was a voice for those who had suffered at the hands of a man who had abused his power. The courtroom drama continued, and as the hearing progressed, I could see Dan's facade beginning to crack. He was losing his cool, and the veneer of confidence he had displayed earlier was gone. His lawyer stumbled through his questions, trying to regain control. Finally, the prosecutor turned to me again. "Mark, what do you want to see happen to Dan Thompson for his actions?" I took a deep breath, and for the first time I let my emotions surface. "I want him to face the consequences of what he's done. I want him to understand that his actions have real-world impacts on people's lives. It's time for accountability." As I spoke those words, I felt a weight lift. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing I had done the right thing. I walked out of that courthouse, feeling lighter than I had in months, knowing that I had taken a stand. But as I left, I could shake the feeling of uncertainty regarding Julie. She had been caught in the crossfire, and while I didn't want to help her, I couldn't deny that I still cared. She had hurt me, but she was also a part of my life for so long. As the gravity of the situation set in, I knew the next steps would be the hardest. I had come too far to turn back now, but could I really leave her to face the consequences alone? The aftermath of the hearing brought a new wave of emotions that I hadn't fully anticipated. The adrenaline rush of standing up against Dan was intoxicating, yet the reality of what lay ahead began to settle in. I had done what I set out to do, but the consequences were only just beginning to unfold, and I could feel the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The investigation continued, and news of Dan's fraudulent activities spread like wildfire. Clients began to come forward, sharing their experiences, and it seemed like the walls were closing in around him. As I watched the events unfold, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. I was finally vindicated, but at what cost? Julie's emotional state deteriorated. She became increasingly withdrawn, spending her days locked away in our bedroom, consumed by the fallout of her choices. I could hear her muffled sobs through the walls, and it tugged at my heartstrings. Despite everything, a part of me still cared for her. It was a strange dichotomy. I wanted to see her suffer for her actions, but I also wanted to reach out and comfort her. One evening, as I sat in the living room staring blankly at the television, I heard a soft knock on the doorframe. It was Julie, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked fragile, and for a moment I was taken aback by the depth of her vulnerability. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to slam the door to keep her out of my life for good. But another part, perhaps the part that once loved her, was curious to hear what she had to say. "What's there to talk about, Julie?" I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Please. Just give me a chance," she pleaded, stepping into the room. "I know I messed up. I need to explain. I need you to understand why I did what I did." I motioned for her to sit down, taking a deep breath as I prepared myself for whatever twisted logic she might present. "All right, explain," I said, feeling the tension in the air. "I was lost, Mark. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I got caught up in the idea of success, of being someone important in the industry. Dan made me feel special, like I was on top of the world. But it was all a lie," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I thought I could compartmentalize, that it was harmless fun. I never meant to hurt you." "Harmless fun," I echoed, the anger rising in my chest. "You cheated on me. You betrayed the trust we built together." "I know," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And I can't take it back. I was foolish and selfish. But being in this mess has made me realize how much I truly care about you. I want to fix this. I want to make things right." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I watched her, torn between the anger that still burned in me and the flicker of compassion I felt for the woman I had once loved. "What do you expect me to say? That I'll forgive you and we can just go back to the way things were?" I replied, my voice cold. "No, I don't expect forgiveness just like that. But I want to try to rebuild, try to prove to you that I've changed," she said, her voice trembling with sincerity. I felt the ache in my chest grow heavier. Was it really possible to rebuild from this wreckage? I was still processing the pain of her betrayal, and the thought of going back to normalcy felt impossible. "I don't know if that's even possible, Julie. You've changed everything. I can't just forget what you did," I replied, my voice wavering. "I understand. It's going to take time," she said softly. "But I love you, Mark. I'm willing to fight for you, for us. Just give me a chance to show you." The sincerity in her voice shook me. I had never heard her speak like this before, not genuinely. I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, the ambitious, determined person who had captivated my heart. But the betrayal still loomed large, casting a long shadow over every word she said. "I need time to think," I said finally, standing up. "I can't just jump back into things. You broke my trust, and that doesn't heal overnight." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. The decision to confront Julie, to hear her side, had given me the space to consider the possibility of healing, though it felt distant. I had fought hard for my dignity and my peace of mind, and now I needed to focus on what I wanted for myself moving forward. The investigation proceeded, and Dan's empire continued to crumble. As the truth came to light, I felt a sense of justice being served, but the emotional toll weighed heavily on me. I began to reflect on my own journey of self-discovery. I started taking time for myself, focusing on my own needs, hobbies, and friendships. I dived back into my work and poured my energy into personal projects that had been sidelined during my marriage. In doing so, I discovered a sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in ages. I was reclaiming my identity, independent of Julie's choices. As the days turned into weeks, I kept the lines of communication open with Julie but maintained my distance. I observed her efforts to improve herself, attending therapy and seeking support from friends. She was genuinely trying to understand the impact of her choices, and it was clear she was on her own journey of growth. I couldn't deny that I still felt something for her, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back to each other. But I also knew that forgiveness would come at its own pace. Trust, once shattered, was a fragile thing. Eventually, I found the strength to set boundaries. I told Julie that while I was open to the idea of working towards a better relationship, I needed to prioritize my own healing first. I would not rush into anything without feeling secure in my own emotional landscape. As I moved forward, I realized that life was about more than just one betrayal. It was about growth, resilience, and the choices we made along the way. I was determined to come out of this experience stronger, whether that meant rebuilding my life with Julie or moving on without her. In the end, I learned that while betrayal can tear you apart, it can also be a catalyst for profound change. It was a painful lesson, but one that pushed me to rediscover my strength and redefine my worth. I was ready to embrace whatever the future held, knowing that I had the power to shape my own destiny, one step at a time.